Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about some new rule changes that have just been approved for 2024, the 2-minute warning and the helmet comms being the main among them, but there are a couple others that were agreed upon that I want to break down for you all. Then we're going to get into some spring game takeaways. We'll get into Michigan, Texas, and Oklahoma today, but we'll definitely continue throughout the week because it was a very busy Saturday around college football. Then we're going to get into a transfer portal update. A ton has been happening around the sport on that front. We've had a couple of different commitments to different teams. We have some intel about where some big-time players might end up. And then we have some new players getting into the portal that we definitely need to be watching. And then we will finish it off with a Good Vibes Monday. And today we're going to talk about some transfer portal success stories. Obviously, there has been a lot of negative energy around the portal, some coming from myself, but I think it's always important to highlight the good in that system as well. So I want to do that today and just remind that not everything is bad in terms of the transfer portal. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here. You can ask a question that you've been wondering about, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a fun interactive experience here, maybe bring up something that I had forgotten to bring up or ask a question that you're wondering about. So definitely use that if you want to leave any questions. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in. We have tons of stuff changing around college football, and obviously a lot of the energy has been put towards conference realignment and all of the stuff going on with Florida State and the ACC. A ton of different stuff is going on around the sport in terms of change, but these next two are a little bit easier to wrap your head around, and we actually know what they look like in practice because the NFL does them. So the 2-minute warning and helmet comms have officially been approved for 2024. It's going to mirror the way that the NFL works. So for the helmet communications, it's going to be one player on either side of the ball for each team will have what they call the green dot. So they'll have a green dot on the back of their helmet, which will indicate they are the person with the headset in their ear. They will be tied to a coach on the sideline. Usually the play caller, almost 99% of the time, will be the play caller, and they'll be able to talk to them up until, I think, 15 seconds left on the play clock is when it cuts off, or when the snap is. Whichever one of those happens first is kind of just the way they go about things. So it's one of the interesting things where this was passed and you're more than welcome to use it, and there will be plenty of teams. I would argue probably the majority of the teams will utilize this, but it seems like you don't have to. So you can definitely make a decision if you don't want to use it. Even if one team in the game has decided not to use it, the other team can. So it'll be interesting to kind of see which teams fall into which categories, if there's any patterns that kind of form in this, because one of the things that we've talked about on this show, talking about this, and one of the things that has become more and more prevalent as I've kind of gotten into this more and more is this is really going to benefit offensive coaches, right? There's this ability to be in your quarterback's ear to show him how the coverage is changing, or that safety is coming down in the box. Make sure that you are watching the seam because that might be open, type of thing. So there's this ability to kind of play sort of like video games. It's something that they trial ran this during the bowl games last year, and it's something that some coaches said. I think Mike Loxley was the main one that had said a number of times in the post-game and subsequent interviews where it felt like he was playing a video game, and mostly because during the bowl game, it didn't cut off until the snap. So you had all the time in the world to talk to your quarterback to see how the coverage changed throughout the, even last 15 seconds of the play clock. And it's a very interesting thing because it makes so much difficulty, obviously, for the defense, because when you can kind of when you have someone like Mike Loxley, who has such an impressive record of running incredible offenses, and now he has even more control over what happens in a play. It's never ideal, right? So I think the offensive coaches will definitely benefit from this the most. I think it definitely does help the defense. I think it'll help different defenses to different degrees, obviously. But I would say the vast majority of the help is going to the offensive side of the ball. I think having someone in the ear of the quarterback up until the snap is an absolute luxury. Well, not up until the snap, until 15 minutes left on the play clock or the snap, which is actually something I want to get into because I do think this will increase the pace of play for the teams that already go fast. The Texas, Ole Miss, these really high-powered offenses. You look at it and you say, I think there's some change of pace within there. If you watch the Texas games, there's a lot of differing of the way that they're going about business, whether it's in between the plays or with the plays in general. Running quick pass plays or making more long drawn out run plays or even long drawn out pass plays. So I think there's this ability now to not only get the play in as quickly as possible, have the quarterback disseminate that information as quickly as possible, and then get aligned. And you can do all that while the defensive coordinator is screaming in the ear of the linebacker trying to get everyone aligned, because I'd argue that's a lot tougher on the defensive side of the ball than the offensive, because you're kind of playing a reaction game in some of the coverages that you set up. You see a number of times where a defense will have a certain set and then the offense will come out of their huddle, set up the wide receivers, and corners will move all over the place. So I think this does give a benefit to the offense in terms of just being able to look at the game very objectively and have maybe more of a control over it than maybe the defense will under this new rule. But I still do think the defense will benefit from this. And I think one of the things that we've talked about a couple of times as we've kind of gotten into the helmet comms in particular has been this idea that it creates kind of a chess game within the football game, right? We've seen this before, throughout college football, but there's this tendency for really, really good play callers and really, really good coaches to kind of play each other instead of trying to play the players on the field or do anything like that. So it's very much a chess game between those two. I think that only increases with this. I think you have so much ability to control what's going on the field that you're almost going to see, these guys go mano a mano on who can make the right adjustments, who can call the right plays at the right times, who can push the right buttons. And one of the things that might be kind of overlooked in all this, but who has the good relationship with the guy that you're in the ear of? A lot of these situations around college football, now a lot of them are good. I don't necessarily think that there's a ton of play callers and quarterbacks that are at odds by any means, but this is going to definitely add some strain to those relationships. It's definitely going to add a new layer to those relationships, and you'll figure out kind of where everyone stands with their play caller, whether it's, Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian or Carson Beck and Mike Bobo. You'll figure out kind of how close they are, how much in lockstep they are, and it'll be really interesting to watch. Not only, are they able to kind of handle all that, the player, but are they able to handle, the coach being in your ear constantly? Because I'm sure they already get a plenty of coaching and plenty of yelling in their ear from that coach anyway. But it'll be really interesting to see if this tests any of those relationships and if we see any cracks start to form. But at the end of the day, I do think for the vast majority of college football, there is a good relationship between the quarterback and the play caller, or the star linebacker and the defensive play caller. So usually you wouldn't find much of a problem, but it could just be that the really elite relationships, the ones that are in more of a lockstep and have been around a little bit longer, might benefit even more from this. And another layer to this that I think kind of goes hand in hand with the offense kind of benefiting the most from this was brought up by J.D. Pickle over at On3 Sports, and he said coaches that were quarterbacks in high school or in college, or in the NFL will benefit from this the most. And I think that totally makes sense, right? You have the ability to not only be in the ear of one of your players, but one of the players that you know exactly what's going through their head as they kind of go through these defensive checklists that they need to, and you have seen the field from their point of view, right? So there's this ability to kind of get in the mind of your quarterback that might not be there for some other teams. So when you talk about those type of players, you have Steve Sarkisian, obviously played at BYU in his days. Josh Heupel was the quarterback at Oklahoma, was remarkable there. Lincoln Riley was mostly a backup during his career, but was a quarterback and learned a ton during his college career. Ryan Day was a quarterback. So you have some guys that are the elite of the elite when it comes to putting together offenses that are quarterbacks that have quarterbacks in their system, a lot of them that are experienced or that they have good relationships with. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of, is Steve Sarkisian taking full advantage of this? Is Josh Heupel taking full advantage of this? And are they utilizing it maybe to a better degree than some other people in the game? Because it's going to be, razor thin margins, as it usually is in the sport, especially with something new like this where you're going to have to adapt to it. You're going to have to change kind of the way that you go about business on a daily basis, or go about business at least on Saturdays. I think there is this really interesting layer that this will add in terms of figuring out not only who has the most talented players, not only, who executed their game plan the best, but who has the best relationships, who has the best culture, who has the best ability to handle, new things and obstacles in their path, because this is going to be something that is new for a lot of these kids. A lot of these kids have not utilized this. Some have done it in high school, depending on where you played. But some of these kids, this is the first time that they're dealing with this. And it is something that will definitely take time to get used to, but also will definitely be something that I think they'll enjoy very thoroughly. So I think it'll be interesting to watch, what quarterbacks this benefits the most. Does it lean towards the young, talented kids that just needs a little bit of help pre-snap? Because that's obviously a huge benefit of this, is you have the ability to be in that guy's ear, and if a young quarterback is making the wrong read, you can call him off that. At least pre-snap, you can call him off that and kind of make sure that he's going about the pre-snap business the way he should, where in the past, it used to be very talented kids would have to kind of wait their turn to learn the offense to be able to make all the calls and not have any slip-ups. That's obviously less of a concern now. So it'll be interesting to see if it's more of a, the veterans that can handle this type of thing better really thrive under this. It could be that really talented young kids take over the veteran leadership or the veteran places of these quarterbacks, just to see kind of what happens and see if talent can kind of win out. And to be totally honest with you, I have no real problem with that. I think that's one of the things that football is about, especially from the quarterback position, is getting these kids as many live reps as possible, as early as possible, and doing them in the right manner, right? And I think this gives you kind of the ability to do that at least on a more consistent basis with young players. But let's talk about the 2-minute warning. This one is one that pretty much cut and dry. There wasn't much to be done about this, and I know people are very, very upset about the possible new commercial break. Apparently, this is supposed to kind of alleviate the annoying commercial breaks, I guess. The classic, you score a touchdown, you go to commercial, you get a kickoff, you go back to commercial. Those are insanely frustrating. They happen pretty much every Saturday. So apparently this is supposed to kind of alleviate those, make it a little bit easier to fit in the TV timeouts that they need to, because sometimes you get backed up and then you get in that situation where you're watching more commercials than you watch football in the last, 15 minutes. So it gets a little bit frustrating, but hopefully this will kind of do away with that. And I think it's a rule that I don't necessarily love, but it doesn't necessarily hurt anything. They set up the stopping clock, with 2 minutes left in the half and the game. So this kind of aligns with that, and it makes sense. So not necessarily going to lose sleep over the 2-minute warning by any means, but some other changes that were approved on Friday by the NCAA, penalizing horse collar tackles that occur inside the tackle box for a 15-yard personal foul. So this is something that to be totally honest, I didn't know what it wasn't in place in the first place, but it probably should be. It's something that, if you have a couple of these in a game, you will get, thrown out of the game. So definitely will change the way that pass rushers go about business. You don't want to just be grabbing at quarterbacks willy-nilly, because if you catch them on a horse collar, you could get 15 yards and be in danger of possibly missing the rest of the game later on. So definitely an interesting one there. Another one is allowing conferences the option to use collaborative video replay review. So I think that's mainly just using their views along with ESPN so they can get as many views and as many pieces to it as possible, which I think is a no-brainer, right? You never want any review system to kind of mess up the way that things go about on Saturdays, so I think that makes total sense. And then finally, head coaches can now conduct interviews with broadcast partners between the first and the third quarter, and this is the one that I dislike the most. I think a lot of us that have watched, a ton of different sports have seen this start to happen in college basketball or in the NBA, and I just find it kind of annoying. I don't think there's any real reason to be interviewing a head coach at that point. Let him go about his business. He already gives you one at halftime, so I think it's a little bit ridiculous, but at the end of the day, it's a small hurdle to get over when you're watching these games. So not necessarily too upset about that, but definitely not one that I would have voted on if I was in the room, I suppose. But tons of changes coming throughout college football. There is tons of stuff happening on the conference realignment front, tons of stuff happening with the playoff, and just everything. It feels like the transfer portal, NIL, everything is moving and shifting as the days go on. But these are ones that we can kind of wrap our head around. And the vast majority of the ones that were agreed upon are pretty benign changes, likely will not change a lot of the gameplay. Now, the helmet comms will transform games. I really do think it'll make a total difference in the way that people go about business, the way that you see offenses kind of play, and I think you'll see kind of the elite of the elite in terms of play callers kind of rise to the top. We've had this idea of, who the best play callers in the country are. Well, that's really going to be put to the test this upcoming year. If they want to make adjustments in the snap, they can do that now by just, talking into his ear. So it'll be really interesting to watch all of this kind of unfold. I think helmet comms is a thing that I've been on board for quite some time, and very, very excited that it's finally coming, because I think it makes it more about football. I think it takes out some of the unknowns from the game and allows, the best team and the best play callers to win. So very, very excited about that. I think it's going to be really, really interesting to watch. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the spring games. There were tons going on Saturday. I only have 3 for you today. We have Michigan, Texas, and Oklahoma, but we will get to plenty more throughout the week because there were tons of takeaways from USC, from Florida State, tons of games going on throughout the country that I want to break down. But today we'll start with 3, and then we'll kind of move from there. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the face, yeah. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the helmet comms and 2-minute warning being approved for 2024. Tons coming on that front. It'll be very interesting, especially to see the helmet comms in action and see which teams kind of benefit the most from that. But let's jump into some spring game takeaways. We had tons going on Saturday, but we have 3 for you today. We have Michigan, Texas, and Oklahoma. Want to break down those for you, and then we'll continue throughout the week catching up on all the games that happened on Saturday. But let's start with the defending champions and the Michigan Wolverines. The first time they were out there with Sharon Moore as the head man, and overall it was a very, very good game. I think everything went about as you could have liked as a Michigan fan, and to me, the biggest takeaway happened in the first 15 minutes of the broadcast. You had Alex Orji come out with the first offense, which was expected. I don't think there was any question about that. He missed his first 2 throws, threw one in front of, I believe, Max Bredesen, and then threw one behind a receiver downfield, and then threw a couple of beautiful passes, led a very nice drive, had a very good touchdown run to finish it off. And then it looked like he was done for the day. To be totally honest, I thought he was done for the day. But then he came back in the second half for 2 drives that kind of stalled. But to me, as I look at it right now, I think they have their guy as of this second. I think if they were to play a game tomorrow, he would absolutely be the quarterback, and Sharon Moore wouldn't think second about it. But I think there is still a reason to definitely be looking over his shoulder. There is plenty of time until next season, and one guy in particular is really pushing him very hard, and he showed that on Saturday. Alex Warren was very, very impressive. He's someone that I definitely have not been talking about enough on this broadcast or on this program, but definitely will going forward, because this is the guy that could actually be pushing for that starting spot. He had a couple of remarkable plays, probably had the play of the day on a beautiful deep ball to Kendrick Bell, the younger brother of Ronnie Bell, the very good wide receiver out of Michigan a couple years ago in the fourth quarter to give the Maize the lead. He also had a 49-yard touchdown run. So he's someone that has a ton of ability and had executed the offense really, really well on Saturday. I think a lot of some of the better plays later in the game came against some of the lower tier defensive players on the team, but doesn't change that they were remarkably impressive, and doesn't change that him moving the offense the way he did was really, really something to watch. And I think it's something that Alex Orji, as of right now, he is their starting quarterback. I have very little question about that, but he's definitely got a little bit of work to do. He's definitely not going to be slowing down anytime soon, because Alex Warren is right there to take it from him. But when you talk about this quarterback position, the future of it is Jaden Davis, and I don't think there's any question about that. He looked really remarkable on Saturday. I think there were definitely some freshman moments. There's no doubt about that. It's always going to happen in the first spring game for some of these kids, but he had some flashes of just elite ability, and we knew that when he came in as a freshman. But seeing him, in real action, he had a couple of balls that missed by a hair, but were definitely really, really impressive to see from someone that young. I think as long as they can get through this season with good quarterback play from Alex Orji or Alex Warren, I think they'll have the ability to pass the baton on to Jaden Davis and feel very, very good about where they stand in quarterback going forward. But for the running backs, it's same old for Michigan, to be totally honest. Donovan Edwards looks like what he is, one of the best running backs in the entire college football. I think him with Khalil Mullings right next to him is about as good as you could possibly ask for, especially with someone like Blake Corum walking out of the program. So was very impressed with them. I think both those guys are really, really good. The O-line looks solid. Losing all 5 starters from a year ago is always a very, very questionable thing, but Michigan doesn't have bad offensive lines very often. So I expect them to be just fine at that position. Obviously, you want to be fully dominant with some of the defensive fronts you'll be facing, but I think they'll get better and better, and definitely got off to a good start on Saturday. As for wide receiver, Tyler Morris is a guy that is definitely going to be the top wide receiver. Now, he didn't necessarily have the biggest day, partly because he was on a pitch count, because you need him to stay healthy for spring or for fall. You do not want him getting any injury that puts his season at jeopardy. So he had a couple of drives here and there throughout the game, but when he was on the field, they were targeting him pretty much every single time. They were looking his direction because he is definitely the alpha in that room. He is the wide receiver 1, and they absolutely need him to show out. He's someone that taking over for a guy like Roman Wilson and someone like Cornelius Johnson, huge shoes to fill, obviously, but he is definitely capable of doing that, and he's definitely taken that step forward to be kind of asserting himself, at least, as the wide receiver one in that room. Now, there were a lot of very good things from the offense on Saturday. There were tons of things that you can take and feel pretty good about if you're a Michigan fan, but the defense was no slouch. They did not struggle in this game by any means. Excuse me. I think the defense really did well, especially the top-level defense. Minus that one drive to start things with Alex Orji, they did a great job of like bending but not breaking, keeping things to field goals, keeping things to punts, on their side of the field, just making sure that these drives that could have been sustained into touchdown drives get stopped at some point so they can get the ball back. So a lot of what we've seen for the past couple of years around there, and with guys like Will Johnson and I believe JioSaavn Barham were kind of on a pitch count in this game. I think it's a great sign for them. And when we talk about the back end, obviously it all starts with Will Johnson, but probably one of the most important players that they're losing across the entirety of the team, take out J.J. McCarthy, is Mike Sanderstrill. He was someone that was absolutely huge for them at the slot position. That's the reason that he is possibly going to be drafted in the top 2 rounds as a slot corner, which is something that doesn't happen very often. He's just a remarkable player, and it looks like the guys that are kind of taking over for him look really solid. Zeke Berry and Jaden McBurrows were the guys getting the snaps there, and they looked good at that position. It's been a strength there since Dax Hill was on campus, and he was remarkable at that position. So they got to keep that going because it's a huge part of that defense. It's a huge part of getting everyone aligned and making sure that everything is set. When you look around the country, you see a lot of the really elite players play that kind of nickel position because it's such a hybrid position, makes you play so many different ways that you need a guy that can be versatile and be different and probably be the best athlete in the room. So definitely good sign there, definitely something that back end needs with a ton of guys heading out the door, but I think they should be more than fine, to be totally honest, on that back end. Overall, this team is setting up very, very well. If you're a Wolverines fan, I think you have to feel as good as you could possibly feel, to be totally honest with you. I think there's definitely still some work to do, and you'd like to see a little bit more consistency out of Alex Orji, and you'd love to see, this offense just run a little bit more efficiently. But at the end of the day, you have Donovan Edwards, you have Khalil Mullings, you have an offensive line that's likely going to be one of the best in the country. So the ability is there. I'm not so worried about Michigan in terms of what they can do on the offensive side of the ball, because what they've done for the past, couple of years is exactly what they're going to do this year. They're going to run the ball really aggressively, pick their moments, and as long as Alex Orji can be accurate, they'll be okay. So this team is going to be good. The defense is going to be great. The margins are just going to be very thin. So things like quarterback play will be the absolute decider, and I feel relatively okay about that position. I think Alex Orji is a good player, but there is that theory, there's too many cooks in the kitchen, there's too many quarterbacks in the room where you can't quite figure out which one you want out there on Saturday. So hopefully that Alex Orji can hit the ground running in his first game and not create some confusion in that room, because we've seen a number of times where teams have gotten into the putting in one quarterback, then pulling him, then putting in the other one, and then going back and forth, and it creates a lot of problems, not only in the games, but in the locker room. It creates some tension that doesn't need to be there. So that's definitely some things that I'm watching for them. But let's move on to Texas, and let's talk about what went on in Austin, Texas. And I think one of the big things that I pulled away from this game was, going into this game, I did not necessarily view it as a Arch Manning versus Trey Owens duel, but that's exactly what we got. Those two guys were just incredible. Ewers played 2 drives to start the game. One ended in a pick six from Alfred Collins when Ethan Burks just absolutely blew up the edge and tipped the ball up into the air. And then he had a couple of good balls on the second drive before it stalled and ended up punting. But don't really need to have the third-year starter on the field too much. No reason to put him in any harm's way. And you know exactly who he is at this point if you're Steve Sarkisian. So I don't think you're worried about Quinn Ewers in the slightest. But then the show started. You had Arch Manning come in and really start most of the game with the first offense, and then you had Trey Owens with the second offense, and they both just went crazy. But let's start with Arch Manning. He started his day with a 75-yard touchdown to DeAndre Moore on a pretty badly broken coverage, which is something that was the big downside of the day that I'll get to here in a second. He had another 75-yard touchdown to Isaiah Bond later in the day. This dude was just dialed in all day. He made a number of really good plays. Obviously, a couple of the touchdown passes were a little bit more open than they will be on Saturdays, but did a ton of really, really good things. There were third downs that he extended with his legs and made something happen. There were a couple where he stayed really strong in the pocket, which had been a worry for him early on in his time during Texas, and made a really good throw for a touchdown to Jaden Blue on his second one. So this guy was really impressive. 300 touchdowns, not 300 touchdowns, 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's about as good as it gets. So definitely got to feel really good if you're a Texas fan. He is definitely one of the best backups in the entire country. But to be totally honest with you, I was more impressed with the third string. Trey Owens coming in as a freshman and doing that in his first spring game was just insanity. He is one of the more natural throwers of the football that I've ever seen. The ball just jumps out of his hands. He's someone that you feel like you could wake up from a deep sleep at 3 a.m. He'll roll out of bed and throw a perfect corner route. So he's someone that football is like second nature to him. Everything just looks really, really comfortable. So he's going to be really good, especially with someone like Steve Sarkisian helping him out along the way. This is a kid that could reach insane heights while at Texas, and they talked about it, I believe, on Texas football when they were breaking down this game. The Texas quarterback room is not going to lack for talent going forward. Steve Sarkisian has rarely had that be the problem, so it'll be interesting to see. Trey Owens, as of right now, will look like the starter after Arch Manning finds his way to the NFL, but who knows? Maybe he finds his way somewhere else. The transfer portal is a very fickle thing, and especially in a room like this, it could be that Trey Owens finds his place somewhere else, but for the time being, I know that Longhorn fans want to keep him around, that's for sure. And as you can imagine, with the quarterback play being what it was, the playmakers all over the field were just incredible on the offensive side of the ball. You had DeAndre Moore, who is someone that might be the most overlooked guy in this group because he probably had the best spring of anyone in this group, to be totally honest with you. Jonte Cook made a couple of really nice plays. Isaiah Bond started slow, had a couple of drops early, but got comfortable and made a number of really good plays. Ryan Wingo was probably the most impressive of the group, made just insane amounts of separation on pretty much every single play, had the touchdown that ended up winning the game for the second team offense and first team defense. So definitely a great game for Ryan Wingo, someone that Texas fans have been very excited to watch throughout spring, and he lived up to the billing, that's for sure. Both running backs, Jaden Blue and C.J. Baxter, had really good days. So the offense is what we expected the offense to be at Texas. It is going to be lethal. It is going to be fast. And the offensive line is going to be really solid. So the offense is pretty much clicking on all cylinders. I would not worry at all if you were a Texas fan because, man, there are so many guys to go to. And with Quinn Ewers at the helm, you got to feel pretty good about the ball getting there when it needs to and being on target. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that. But the defense, it was kind of an up and down day. Now, there were a lot of good things, but the back end was the down, pretty much, to be totally honest with you. There were too many blown coverages, poorly executed man coverage, cover ones that the safeties just took wrong angles on. There was one that was, I believe Michael Taff had one on the Jaden Blue touchdown. Young player Xavier Fasilmi definitely had a mistake early or later on in the game. So it's kind of working out the kinks right now on that back end. It was a problem last year, so it's something that they tried to address with Andrew Makuba coming in. Jahdae Barron came back for his senior year, which was absolutely huge. And both those guys didn't play much on Saturday. So there's a little bit of, it didn't look great by any means, and definitely something that they will have to be working on, but it might have been somewhat circumstantial. They had some guys on pitch count, some guys not playing that much, so it'll be really interesting to see if this is as big of a problem as it looked on Saturday when the season comes around, because if it is, there are some teams on Texas' schedule that will dice them to pieces, if I'm being totally honest. But the D-line was pretty much exactly what you would expect. Tons of talent and ability on the edge. Definitely a lot of blown up plays by those edge rushers. Colton Vasek had a remarkable day. Ethan Burke made the play early in the day on the pick six by Alfred Collins. So a ton of really, really good players on that edge. Not enough bodies at the defensive tackle position. It felt like the rotations were very sparing. It just felt like they didn't have much of a rhythm for when they wanted certain guys to come in and when they wanted them to come out. But that's definitely a position they're going to need some help at. It looked like they took a big step forward to getting that help this weekend that we'll get to here in the next segment. But it'll be interesting to see how that kind of develops, because that was the strength of the team a year ago with Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. Now you got to adjust. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of do that and if they can be the team that they were a year ago, especially against the run, because that was a huge part of their game. But overall, this was a very fun spring game. Some of these spring games tend to be a little bit of snooze fest, but this was not that. It was an absolute duel between those two quarterbacks. I think the Texas quarterback room has always been talked about, has one of the best in the country, and that has not changed one bit. They might have the best backup in the country, and Arch Manning. Trey Owens showed his remarkable ability on Saturday. Definitely some things to fix on defense, but there's plenty of time to do that. And with some of the guys that sat out, I think they'll be more than fine. I'm not sure it will be quite as bad as it looked on Saturday once the season comes around. And obviously, Arch Manning is going to get a ton of the talk, and he absolutely should coming out of this game. Just a reminder, Quinn Ewers has yet to play a full season where he started every single game at Texas. So there's a good chance that we will have to see Arch Manning as the starter at Texas, and he looks ready to roll. Let's put it that way. But let's finish off with Oklahoma here, and let's talk about the quarterback there. Jackson Arnold was just remarkable. The dude has a cannon attached to the right side of his torso. We've talked about it a couple of times, but this dude is just remarkable. Every time you watch him play football, I think he looks like he was built in a lab to play quarterback, and he looked really good in this game. Made some eye-popping throws, mainly the touchdown to Deion Burks, who was the biggest topic of conversation. He was definitely the guy that made everyone really excited, a transfer that came in from Purdue that was just kind of looking for that big chance, and he officially got it, and he looked incredible. He was someone that definitely adds a new dynamic to a wide receiver room that is already remarkable. I don't think they were necessarily looking for a wide receiver one when they got Deion Burks, but they definitely got one. He's an absolute beast, and it looks like him and Jackson Arnold are already on the same page, so huge news out of Norman there. The offensive line was the big-time position group that people were worried about going into Saturday, and they looked okay. Definitely the defensive line won the day, but when you look at some of the names on the edge and the interior of that defensive line for Oklahoma, it's not necessarily crazy that they won the day. I think it totally makes sense. Ethan Downs especially is a guy that could make a huge difference for this Oklahoma team next year. I think he's an absolute he's an absolute game changer and will definitely be a huge player for them this upcoming year. They've already gotten some help from the portal, which we'll get to in the next segment, but O-line is definitely the position to watch as we continue to go towards the season. The running back room looks really solid, led by Gavin Sawchuk. He's going to be the down in and down out back for the most part, but Caleb Hicks, Sam Franklin, a transfer from UT Martin, both looked really solid. If the O-line can come together, I think they should have no problem running the ball, and if they can do that, Jackson Arnold's going to take the top off some defenses from time to time. And much like Texas, the defense was a little bit up and down in this contest. Some blown coverages, particularly on that Deion Burks touchdown. There was no one really picked him up as he came down the seam. So definitely some things to fix on the defensive side of the ball. But the front seven looks really strong. It looks like the front seven that Brent Venables has been picturing ever since he showed up in Norman, and feels like that team is becoming more and more what Brent Venables had in mind, I suppose. So very exciting stuff happening out there. This is a team that has a ton of variation for what their season could look like. It really does come down to the O-line and Jackson Arnold's quarterback play, which in large part comes down to the O-line. So I think that's going to be the position to watch. It'll be really interesting to see how much of an effect they can have, because if they're bad, this offense could really, really struggle. If they are even competent, this offense could, take the SEC by storm. So it'll be really interesting to watch. The defense will need to get more discipline on the back end and definitely not be exposed to deep balls, but at the end of the day, if they can force some turnovers, if they can get home, especially with the edge rushers they have, they'll be more than fine. I think this team is right on track right now. I think they're doing exactly what you would want them to do if you're a Sooners fan, and Brent Venables is slowly becoming more and more his team, which is always what you want for a coach. So much more going on throughout the next couple of days with these breakdowns, because there were tons of games to break down. We have USC, Texas A&M, and more teams coming tomorrow. But that'll do it for this segment, and we will take our second break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the transfer portal. Tons going on in the transfer portal. We officially have some commitments for the first time, so I want to break down where we sit and kind of what could be happening in the next couple of days right after this. So stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the spring games and some takeaways from those games. We got into Michigan, Texas, and Oklahoma, but we'll be continuing those throughout the week. But now let's get into some transfer portal updates. There has been so much going on in the transfer portal, and commitments have started to happen, so wanted to break those down for you, and then we'll get into some intel about the transfer portal, and then some tidbits towards the end here. But let's start with all the commitments, the big-time commitments at least, that have happened throughout the last little bit. We had Colorado get a pair of big-time commitments, as well as another one that will definitely help out in the bunch. Dayon Hayes is probably the biggest one here, an edge rusher from Pitt, was a big-time player at a big-time position of need for them. Adding him to someone like B.J. Green on the other side is going to be quite the duo, so very excited to see what happens there. They're doing exactly what they did a year ago with the Buffaloes. They're definitely upgrading that talent more and more around there, and it continued with Peyton Kirkland, an offensive lineman from Texas, a guy that genuinely probably would have started for Texas next year, but decided he wanted to get his chance earlier on. I would be not surprised at all if he was starting for them week one, because the athleticism, the size, the ability is just off the charts with this kid. So very excited for what he can do. They also got Ryan Buell, a guy from a D lineman from Ohio, a guy that definitely adds some depth to that position and absolutely helps with some run stopping, which is something they really struggled with a year ago. Definitely need bigger bodies in there, and they'll take pretty much anyone that can produce at that level right now. So definitely some good additions there. They also hosted Dallin Hayden, the running back from Ohio State, Elijah Herring, the linebacker from Tennessee. So definitely a lot of things going on in Colorado, like they always are. Deion is going to do what he does, and he's executing the way that we've become accustomed to in the transfer portal right now. But some other teams that got some help. Oklahoma got a big-time O-line help. Branson Hickman, a transfer from SMU, an all-AAC selection a year ago. So definitely a guy that you need if you're Oklahoma. We just talked about the offensive line being the thing that is going to define their season. So definitely needed some help there, and I would be surprised if this was the only guy they brought in. I think they will be more active, especially on the offensive line, and maybe some other positions as they see fit. But definitely that's the main focus for them. Another big-time commitment was Graham Nicholson, a Lou Groza winner from a year ago from Miami of Ohio. He is committed to Alabama. Definitely something they absolutely need. We talked about how that position was kind of up in the air after their spring game. Will Reichard moving on to the next level was a huge part of that. Well, they replaced him with one of the best kickers in the entire country. So I think everything should be fine if you're a Bama fan right now. You should feel okay about that kicking game. So definitely a much-needed addition, and you got to feel great if you're a Bama fan about that one. And then Greedy Vance Jr., a DB from FSU, has committed to USC. Trojans continue to build out that defense as much as possible. Obviously, it is going to take time, but they looked pretty good on Saturday, so we'll definitely break that down tomorrow and break down how Greedy Vance can kind of help out this group that is seems to be slowly improving out there in Southern California. But let's get to some intel about where some players might end up in this portal window. And I think the biggest news that has happened since we last talked about this was Jaden Rashada entering the portal, the guy that was in the center of the NIL debacle at Florida, then spent his first year in Tempe with the Sun Devils and Kenny Dillingham. He has decided to enter the portal, and he has his eyes set on Athens, Georgia, it looks like. He will visit UGA on April 30th and May 1st, and he is definitely someone that I think UGA is leading very heavily for. I would be surprised if the wind shifted so aggressively that he went somewhere else. It feels like he's kind of on the Dante Moore track that a lot of people have talked about, where you know that you're not quite at the point where you can fully realize your ability at the top level, but you can sit behind someone that has, in Carson Beck or in Dante Moore's case, in Dylan Gabriel, and learn so much and then hit the ground running. So that feels like kind of what Jaden Rashada is thinking right now. If that happens, Jaden Rashada against Gunnar Stockton for that starting job next year will be something to watch, that's for sure. Auburn and Mississippi State will also get visits, it seems, but UGA is the heavy favorite, and if they add him to that quarterback room, it would just be insane. Penny Boone is another guy, one of the best running backs in the portal. He actually entered the portal in the winter cycle, went to Louisville from Toledo. He was the MAC Player of the Year a year ago, and then transferred right back out in the spring portal window. And some interesting things have been happening around him. He's been reached out to by pretty much every team in the country. He definitely has a lot of talent, a lot of ability, and tons of teams are looking for running backs. But it looks like he might find his way back to Louisville. There has been more and more smoke around him, possibly just sticking with the Cardinals and moving forward with them, which would be very interesting, but kind of the reality of the transfer portal we live in today. He did mention early on in his recruitment that he wants to play in the SEC, but we'll see what happens. Definitely a commitment to watch, because behind Damian Martinez, he is definitely one of the most, if not, behind Damian Martinez, the best running back in the entire portal. But let's get to Damian Martinez. He's still very much up in the air, and I think he's going to take his time, because this is a big decision for him. Obviously, you're moving on from a place where you felt like your NFL future was just a little bit shakier than it should be, and I think he's trying to move to the team that will give him the best chance to have that NFL future that he definitely should have. And going forward, I tend to lean that Miami and Mario Cristobal will win out for this kid, but Michigan State is still very much in it. UCF is still very much in it, and plenty more teams are going after him. I think Michigan State is one that a lot of people are watching because of Jonathan Smith, but it feels like things are starting to push more and more in the Miami direction. Michigan State is hosting Andrew Paul I believe this upcoming weekend, so they could be looking other directions. And I think if they did get Andrew Paul, him and Aiden Childs would be quite the duo in that backfield and would shock some people definitely this upcoming fall. But let's talk about Cormani McClain. He was the guy that transferred from Colorado after a very weird year where him and Dion necessarily didn't click the way that you would have loved if you were a Buffs fan, and things just didn't quite work out. But he has made some headlines recently by going on Instagram Live and seemingly taking a shot at Colorado. It's kind of, tough to really know what he was trying to say, but he said he really wants to play for a quote-unquote real program, and he wants to not play for clicks. So obviously, Dion in Colorado has gotten quite that rap, being the team that is just out here trying to get as many impressions on Twitter as possible, and maybe Cormani McClain feels the same way. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. It feels like USC and USF are the teams that are kind of standing out right now, but he dropped a top 11 list. I think probably 6 of those teams are not interested, to be totally honest with you. But at the end of the day, I think this is a very talented kid, and if he pops up at USC or USF, I think he could have a ton of success. And hopefully he'll be able to thrive in a new environment, because obviously it just wasn't the right fit at Colorado. But let's finish it off here with the intel, at least, talking about Texas. There has been a ton of talk around that defensive tackle position, something that we talked about in the spring game. Definitely need more bodies there, and they've been doing a lot to fill that void. Bill Norton and Jay Toia are two guys from UCLA that they're going after very, very aggressively. They added Johnny Nansen, who is the defensive coordinator at Arizona, excuse me. Both these guys are Arizona. I don't know why I said UCLA. They got Johnny Nansen, who was the Arizona defensive coordinator a year ago. So definitely a huge plus for them to snag those guys up. And if they can do that, I think they'll feel much better about where that position is right now. I think they have the top level talent with Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, but definitely need some more guys to stand up very, very quickly. But some other transfer news just to add in here. We had Adam Kiasi, a Clemson freshman who just enrolled. He has decided to transfer, and he wasted no time. He is committed to PJ Fleck and the Golden Gophers. The kid is 6'8", but only 235. So definitely has the length. If he can fill out, he could be an absolute game wrecker. Someone like Ethan Burke at Texas, who's 6'7", has kind of become that player where when he came onto campus, he was very lean, but has slowly filled out and become a very, very good player for them. So definitely a huge pickup for Minnesota there. Along with Jaden Rashada leaving Arizona State, Elijah Badger, the top wide receiver for the Sun Devils, has decided to leave. Definitely someone that they were expecting to be the number one wide receiver on their team this upcoming window, and it has not been very kind to Kenny Dillingham these first week or so in this window. So definitely a lot of things to answer over there in Tempe, but definitely not the blow that they wanted to take, that's for sure. And then a couple of LSU defenders have found their way into the portal. We had Ryan Yates, a safety, Christian Braithwaite, a linebacker, and Jeremiah Hughes, a corner, all finding their way into the portal. Now, not really sure how big of a deal it is to be losing defenders from the team a year ago, because we all watched that team, and it was not pretty at times. So not really sure how big of a deal this is. I think they're definitely going to be trying to upgrade at a lot of those positions, and it'll be interesting to see what they do in the portal. But all of the stuff in the portal has been very interesting thus far. We've yet to have kind of the big moment, right? I think a lot of people, including myself, were worried this would be one of the craziest portal cycles we've had, and it's had its moments, don't get me wrong, but hasn't quite had the landslide that we were expecting. Hopefully we can avoid that, definitely knocking on wood, but it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next, week. We still have plenty of time for kids to enter, so it could get wild pretty quickly. But for the time being, it's been, at the very least, as quiet as you could have hoped, I suppose. But we are going to take our final break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about a Good Vibes Monday, and we're going to remind you that the transfer portal isn't all bad. There has definitely been a lot of bad publicity around the transfer portal since it has kind of joined college football, but there's been plenty of success stories as well. So I want to break those down for you guys after this, so stick around for that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little bit of a transfer portal update, gave you guys an idea of where everything's sit. Commitments have started to roll in, so definitely a lot going on. We'll definitely keep you updated there, but let's continue talking about the transfer portal, but not the ones that are going on right now. We'll talk about some of the success stories we have seen in the portal. I feel like a lot of the discussion around the portal right now has been very negative, and I have taken part in that quite a bit. There is definitely some parts of the portal that I am not a huge fan of, but definitely there are some parts that make it super important to this game, and definitely something that is vital to the future of this game. And I think the best way to kind of contextualize that is break down the quarterback position, because that's the one that, we're all putting a lot of energy into. That's the one you're watching, and there's been a ton of really, really good transfer quarterbacks that, for different reasons, have found their way to a new program and have become college football legends very, very quickly. But let's start with who personally, in my opinion, is the best quarterback I've ever seen play in college football, Cam Newton. He was someone that started his career at Florida before finding his way to Auburn. And his decision obviously was not totally his to leave Florida. Definitely made some mistakes over there in Gainesville. But he went on to have a fantastic career at Auburn and did remarkable things, had one of the best individual seasons that anyone has ever seen, went on to win the Heisman, won a national championship, went on to have the remarkable career he did in the NFL. So I think, obviously, definitely not the circumstances you want him transferring under, but he was able to make the most of his second chance, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about the transfer portal is you give these kids who maybe made some decisions they wish they could take back, the ability to, get that second chance and find a new place to play and hopefully thrive. And Cam Newton did that to an absolute T. And the other guy that did that maybe even better than Cam Newton did was Joe Burrow. He spent the vast majority of his career in the Scarlet and Gray up at Ohio State, actually graduated from there, was in the middle of a very heated battle with Dwayne Haskins, someone that was just remarkable for Ohio State, has unfortunately passed on now, but they were battling for that starting job, and it was very, very close before he broke his foot. So Joe Burrow was in a position where there wasn't a lot of options, right? He probably was not going to be the starter at Ohio State anymore. He was probably rarely going to get that shot just because of the remarkable players that were rolling in and out of that program during that time. So he found his way to LSU. Ed Orgeron took a chance on him, and his life changed forever. He led probably the best offense that we have ever seen in college football in 2019, LSU. He did just remarkable things, and now is in the NFL, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So just a remarkable story, another example of, whether it's you made a poor decision and you had to leave the school that you were at, but you were able to land on your feet like Cam Newton, or you had some injuries that got in your way and you had to find a new place to play like Joe Burrow. Both those things are great ways to utilize the portal. Hopefully, the kids that do it that way can find a good place to play and land on their feet. So both really great examples, but it doesn't stop there by any means. You have Baker Mayfield, one of the best stories in college football history, in my opinion. Started at Texas Tech before transferring and walking on to the Sooners. Definitely something that is a daunting feat for sure. You're going in conference, but having to walk on, having to just lay it out on the table and, do the work that's necessary to become the quarterback that he was capable of being. And he went on to become one of the most accomplished quarterbacks in college football history. Recorded over 1,200 passing yards, almost 900 rushing yards, 137 touchdowns in 3 seasons. So went absolutely insane. Won the 2017 Heisman Trophy. Obviously, he never got the ultimate goal of a national championship, which is obviously really tough. But if you look back at those games, I think you'll find it wasn't quite Baker Mayfield's fault in the majority of those games. So definitely one of the most, at least statistically, one of the most accomplished players in college football history. One of the most impressive stories in the sport, and definitely a guy that utilized the portal in the perfect way and found his way to Lincoln Riley, which we'll actually get into here in a second. But the only story that actually, I think, trumps Baker Mayfield is Stetson Bennett. He is the guy that started his career at UGA as a preferred walk-on before making his way to Jones Community College for a couple of years, played some really, really good football there, then made his way back to Athens as a preferred walk-on. So this is he definitely wanted to be a Bulldog, definitely wanted to lead this team, and he went on to do that. He lived out his childhood dream, led his childhood team to back-to-back titles, became a Heisman finalist, and one of the most accomplished players in college football history. So just a remarkable story, definitely one that I think a lot of people identified with and a lot of people loved, because it was just wild to watch a kid that looked undersized, looked like he didn't have the physical tools, looked like he wasn't a starting quarterback for the University of Georgia, become one of the best players, if not the best player in Georgia history. So it's just remarkable to see that type of thing happen. Obviously, you have guys like Herschel Walker that were better football players, but in terms of accomplishments, I mean, no one really touches Stetson Bennett in the UGA history. And then you got guys like Kyler Murray. You have guys like Jalen Hurts, Caleb Williams, all using it in different ways, but finding the same guy in Lincoln Riley. So maybe that's the secret sauce that everyone needs to find, especially if you're a quarterback. Just find Lincoln Riley in the portal. You might win a Heisman. You'll do right by yourself. But at the end of the day, I think all of these guys, while, Caleb Williams was particularly the one that people were very upset about, I think a lot of players commit to coaches. A lot of players commit to offenses, and that's something that Caleb Williams definitely did. He wanted to follow Lincoln Riley over to USC, and he did that. Jalen Hurts had a very interesting time at Alabama, was one of the most admired, really, college football players I've seen in quite some time, just because of the way that he handled that last season at Alabama. Found his way to Norman, and became a Heisman finalist, did some remarkable things. And then Kyler Murray, obviously, finding his way from Texas A&M, didn't necessarily work out there the way that he had hoped, but did incredible things at Oklahoma. So it gives you an idea just how it's kind of impacted our college football world, and how, some of these stories, you might not love the transfer of Caleb Williams. You might not love some of these guys' decisions that they made, but it was the best decision for them, which is ultimately the goal in all of this, is to make sure that these kids are set up the best way that they can be, and playing the game they love in a way that they love it, in a place that they love to be at. So definitely really important stuff there. But if you want to go even more recently, we have Quinn Ewers, Shadur Sanders, and Travis Hunter, all guys that utilize the portal and will be top players in next year's draft. And then in this year's draft, you have Jared Verse, Jaden Daniels, Liati Latu, all guys that use the portal for different reasons, and all benefited greatly and will be first-round picks in this upcoming draft. So the portal has been a very, very interesting entity. If you want to go a little bit further back, you got guys like Randy Moss, Roger Staubach, Troy Aikman, Russell Wilson. So tons of guys that have benefited greatly from using the portal and it being a thing in general. So while I totally understand there's been a ton of stuff happening around college football, and its impact on college football has been negative in a ton of different respects, and I'm not necessarily arguing that it hasn't, but it's given these guys a second chance. And I think that's something that is super necessary for college football. It's super necessary for kids in general, right? I've been in their shoes, been a young kid at 18 years old, and you don't make the best decisions at times. And I think giving these kids the chance to learn from stuff and maybe find a new place to play, maybe things just didn't work out at the first place, maybe injuries were a part of it, whatever it is, just having the ability to get back into football, get back into a new rhythm and a new place, and reach your highest potential is always what we should want for these college kids. So while there's definitely some decisions that you don't necessarily love during this time, it's a super important part of the sport, and something that if we did away with, I think you'd be doing a huge disservice to the kids that are currently in college and kind of making their way into college football. But as we get into this portal, I think that's something we should all be looking for. The stories that are the good stories, not necessarily highlighting the guys that might have left for the NIL deal or might have left for the wrong reasons. We start highlighting the guys that are leaving for the right reasons, whatever those are. I highlighted Darian Brown the last time we talked, someone that has gone through a slew of medical troubles throughout his time at Texas, finally got back to a healthy place and can play football again, is in the transfer portal. Cannot wait to see where he ends up. Hopefully he succeeds immensely in his future. You have guys like Cam Ward and Damian Martinez who, while you would have loved for them to stay up at Washington State and Oregon State, you got to play on a bigger stage, especially if you're that talented, especially if you're those kids in particular. So don't necessarily blame them for that. I think there's certain kids within this slew of kids that you might not fully agree with, and within this system that is mostly flawed, there are definitely some stories and some beautiful things within it. So I think this is a time of year where a lot of people talk really negative, talk down on the portal, and while I fully understand that, and I've participated from time to time, I think it's always important to kind of look at the pros that we're getting from it, and the ability for these kids to learn from mistakes, to bounce back from injuries, to do the things that they should deserve to do, right? So there's tons of stuff going on with the portal. There's going to be tons going on for the next week that I'll be talking about. I'm sure I will not be too nice about the portal in future shows, but for the time being, I just wanted to highlight some of the guys that have really benefited from it and why I think it is a super important part to college football going forward and college sports going forward in general. So that'll be really interesting to watch, but that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram for all of the content and updates. We have so many great people doing incredible work across pretty much every sport you could possibly think of. So definitely tune in to all of those shows to see what happens there. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.